Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. Today on the podcast, we are super excited to be chatting about Guadalajara, Mexico. And if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you probably heard us talk about Guadalajara back in 2018 because we went on a very brief trip there, like one night to Guadalajara, but it piqued our interest enough for us to want to return. And so we went back this past fall and we spent 7 weeks living and working and hanging out in Guadalajara. And Guadalajara is the capital and largest city in the state of Jalisco, which is the same state that Puerto Vallarta is located in. So for those of you who don't know Mexico super well, you can think kind of west and sort of central Mexico. The population of Guadalajara is about 5 million people, and it's the second most populated city in Mexico, second to Mexico City, of course. It is the home to the University of Guadalajara, and it's about an hour away from the world-famous region of Tequila.
And one of the first things that we did when we got to Guadalajara was take a walking tour that covered a lot of the history of the city. And the city was first founded all the way back in 1542, actually on February 14th.
Which is my birthday.
And coming up very soon.
Tomorrow.
And since then has gone through all sorts of iterations and change, war, being torn down, being built up again. And something that's really fascinating walking around the city is you can see kind of some of the evolution that happens in some of the different buildings. And one thing you also notice walking around the city is the amount of churches. There are big, large cathedrals all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing all of the churches and cathedrals around the city was something we noticed almost right off the get-go, like our first couple of days just walking around. And it's so interesting to learn about all their different meanings and importances to the city and to the history of Mexico in general.
Yeah, and one other important part of Guadalajara today is the University of Guadalajara. It's a very large university, world-class university that produces a ton of graduates in lots of different disciplines and has really helped Guadalajara become an important part of like Mexico's tech hub. And the university was actually founded all the way back in 1791 and has been growing along with the city ever since. And Guadalajara also played an important part in the Mexican independence.
Yeah, absolutely, which we'll talk about shortly. We actually got to experience there. But before we get to that, I mentioned before that we had been to Guadalajara for just a really short period of time back when we were basing ourselves in Mexico City. And so this fall, when we were thinking about where we wanted to go, we decided that we wanted to settle down for a little bit. So, a month or two, and we wanted to try a city in Mexico that was different than Mexico City. If you guys have listened to the show, you know we love Mexico City. We are totally biased to Mexico City being, our favorite city pretty much ever in the world, and definitely our favorite city in Mexico, but we thought it would be really cool to just get some experience somewhere else and just try a different city. And so one of the reasons that we decided to try Guadalajara is that we had been this one time before. We had really enjoyed our first impression of it. And we thought it would be a good option for us to base ourselves as nomads because it's smaller, it has slightly better air quality than Mexico City, and it's still big enough that it's a big bustling city. Like I said before, it's 5 million people. There's a ton of stuff going on there. There's a ton of great restaurants and bars. And so we thought, why not give it a try and see if we like it?
Yeah, you mentioned it kind of coming from us thinking as a good place for nomads. And I think it really is. It's a type of city as well that I think if we had been planning a trip through Mexico over the course of a couple of weeks, just travel, just vacation, I don't know if Guadalajara would really have been on there for more than a pass through. But really being able to settle in and get to know a city like Guadalajara for 7 weeks was really cool experience. And I really do think it lives up to that. One of the things when we were thinking about going to Guadalajara, thinking about where we wanted to base ourselves in Mexico, was just a general scan of accommodations, co-working spaces, and prices. And Guadalajara definitely stands out. There's tons of co-working space options because of a growing startup and tech scene there. But the prices for Airbnbs and general accommodation are quite a bit better than Mexico City, depending on where you want to go, if you want to be close to the city. And the other thing about it is that basing ourselves in Guadalajara was going to let us get to know a whole different region. There's lots of opportunities to travel in and around there, which you've heard from some of our episodes from that time period.
Yeah, absolutely. So we decided to spend 7 weeks in Guadalajara, and we spent from the beginning of September into the 3rd week of October of 2019 in Guadalajara, which was an awesome time to be there. The weather that time of year is really great in probably most parts of Mexico. It's kind of the end of rainy season. When we first got there, we got caught in a couple of major rainstorms, lots of wetness, but within the first week or two of us being there, that pretty much ceased to exist, and we had really, really great temperatures. We stayed at an Airbnb in the Americana district, or really close to the Americana district, which is really close to Chapultepec. So Chapultepec is a name that you'll hear if you're in and around Mexico. Mexico City's, big famous park is called Chapultepec. In Guadalajara, it's a major two-way street that has a ton of restaurants and a ton of bars. And so we were really close to that, in walking distance of pretty much everything we needed. And we also worked at a co-working space that was right on Chapultepec. It was called Colabora, and it was the perfect co-working space for what we needed for that time period. And then we were also able to get a gym membership at SmartFit, which is a popular Latin American gym brand. And it was literally beside Colabora, which was honestly the perfect setup for us. So although we did lots of really cool stuff in Guadalajara, which we're going to talk about, we actually set ourselves up with a pretty regular day-to-day life. And if you have listened to us before or listened to other stuff kind of on Nomad Life, this is something that's so important in order to get projects done, to get work done, and to just kind of feel settled, because traveling really fast all the time can be really exhausting and also really ungrounding. And it's also really hard to grow a business that way. So after a super busy time back home in Canada, we wanted to kick off our time in Latin America with a little bit of grounded project time, and our setup in Guadalajara was really perfect for that.
Getting into and being able to create kind of a rhythm and a structure is so important when you're a nomad. And when I think back to our time in Guadalajara, that's one of the first things that stands out to me, just about how we just did really well with making a structure. So I think on either our second day in Guadalajara, we went and checked out a co-working space. We were like, yep, this is the one. It has a gym right next door. So we signed up at the gym that day. I think we might have worked out that day or maybe the next day. And it was right in the heart of the restaurant bar part of town. So there was so many good places to go eat. Guadalajara as well has Uber Eats, and it has lots of other food delivery services and Uber, so you can get around from place to place really easy. And so we were able to set up and create structure, which is, if you're a nomad, so important. And I think one of the things that makes a great nomad hub is that you can get into like a good rhythm and a good structure that allows you to balance travel and work.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you guys know, we love to adventure as well. So we made sure that we had lots of opportunities for adventures while we were in Guadalajara. I think we had like 6 full weekends while we were there, which gave us lots of time to do stuff. So let's talk about a couple of the things that we did. You mentioned that one of the first things we did was we took a walking tour on the history of Guadalajara. And we got to do that with our friend Daniel, who's also based in Guadalajara. And we actually did an Airbnb experience. And at the time, that was our very first Airbnb experience.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about that. I just have to pause for a second and think like, oh, that actually was our first, because it's something we've looked at so many times in so many places. We've been like, we should do that. We talked to so many people who have done it. But yeah, we were able to find a history tour with kind of a young, I believe he's a history student from Guadalajara, who was able to show us around. And it was a really great experience. And we'll put a list of everything we did in Guadalajara onto our show notes at theworldwanders.com. So if you're planning a trip there, you can go check that out. But getting to walk around the city really early on, like I mentioned at the start of the episode, really helpful for grounding, getting to know the different parts of the city, especially parts that weren't part of our daily routine, and understanding a bit more about the context and the history of how Guadalajara came to be and how it exists today.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we used to do when we traveled in Europe, I guess our very first backpacking trip, is when we arrived in a place, we would immediately try and find a free walking tour or a paid walking tour. And since transitioning into more longer term stays and working and traveling more, it's something that we've kind of got out of the habit of doing. And I actually really loved that with Guadalajara, we spent our first couple of days, like one, settling, like you said, co-working space, gym, grocery stores, all that sort of stuff. And then two, really getting a lay of the land in terms of the history and the downtown city center. And I think it's important to note that kind of like Mexico City, the historic city center is a little bit separate from the area that we stayed in. It's not too far. It was maybe like 25 minutes walking and, maybe 10 minutes by car. And it's just interesting because the historic city center could be a great place to stay if you could find a nice Airbnb or a hotel. There's certainly tons of restaurants and tons of bars and lots of stuff to see and do. But I find it really interesting when like the historic city center is different from, I guess, like the more popular sort of happening places to live, which was definitely our experience here.
Yeah, and it almost feels like there's a couple different centers. There's the historic city center, which is kind of still very active, really busy part of the city, but mind you, kind of like the Zocalo area of Mexico City. There's the Chapultepec region where there are lots of bars, restaurants. It's a bit more like, not suburb-like, but like lots of houses around. But there's also lots of businesses there. There's co-working spaces, there's offices. And then kind of further up towards the like north western part of the city, there's again another business hub. You can kind of look on a map and see where the co-working spaces are, where the WeWorks are, where the office buildings are. And there's another section up there entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. So just depending on, what you're looking for and that type of thing, definitely worth like checking out the different areas to choose where you want to stay while you're there. And we definitely recommend doing some sort of walking tour or Airbnb experience to just get an understanding of the history, because Guadalajara's history is so important for Mexico. So a couple other things that we did while we were in Guadalajara that were super, super fun was, one, we discovered Bosque Los Colomos. And Bosque Los Colomos is a park kind of in the north section of the city, outside of both Chapultepec area, Americana, and also kind of, northwest of the historic city center. And it is a beautiful, beautiful park. And it also has a Japanese garden in it, which we went and spent an afternoon at. There's tons of restaurants and stuff nearby. There's tons of cafes. We found a couple things that we really liked in that area. So it's a great place for going to grab a coffee and going for a walk. You can enjoy the squirrels, who are particularly
very fat.
Very fat.
They're well fed.
Yeah. In the Japanese garden, you can buy some popcorn to feed them if you want. That's your thing. And that was one of my favorite things we did, just to kind of get away from the traffic and the noise and all that good stuff. Yeah.
And another big thing, kind of within, but technically without, of Guadalajara is Tlaquepaque. And it's interesting because we were actually at a reunion with some of Amanda's family, and some of whom are retired and travel a lot more, especially within Mexico. And we mentioned we were going to go base ourselves in Guadalajara. And one of the relatives said to us, "Oh, like, are you going to go to Tlaquepaque?" And I was like, "Whoa, excuse me? What did you just say?" That's a kind of
Tlaque
racist.
what?
Excuse me. Had no idea what it was. But yeah, very popular area. I think a lot of tours go through there, and it's historic. And we actually kind of dragged our feet a little bit in terms of getting down to visit Tlaquepaque. But what is it actually like down there? What's Tlaquepaque all about?
It is adorable, and you have to go. It's like quintessential little Mexican pueblo with cobblestone streets and really small, colorful buildings. And they've got a beautiful Tlaquepaque city sign, and they've got a street that's, the ceiling of the street, it's not really like in the sky. They've got umbrellas hanging, so the buildings on either side have strung strings and hang umbrellas, which makes like a really cute photo moment. So if you are on Instagram, you've probably seen a photo like that in the history of Instagram. And Tlaquepaque has a cute little area of the street like that. They have lots of restaurants and coffee shops and bars, and everywhere you're going in, and they're playing mariachi, and there's people dancing, and there's lots of sort of traditional stuff like that. And it's a fun experience for sure. I think from what I've heard, it also has a pretty like nice nightlife. If you go in the evening, we actually didn't do that, but That's what I've heard. So there's definitely lots that it has to offer. And it makes for a really great sort of little day trip from Guadalajara. And day trip is hardly even the right word because it's only like, 15 minutes, 20 minutes by Uber from Chapultepec?
Yeah, and on the way from the airport. And yeah, you mentioned very scenic, definitely touristic, but it's interesting when you go, it's not like overwhelmed with foreigners. Or there's a lot of Mexican tourists there as well. So it's touristic from Guadalajara. There's lots of people who live in that area. It's touristic from outside of the country as well, but a really cool area to check out. And then I think my favorite thing within Guadalajara on the outskirts is the Barranca de Huentitán.
Yeah. And that's
or the thing that's basically unpronounceable if you try it in English.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the canyon that Ryan alluded to earlier. And it is really, really weird. Like it's a crazy experience because you're in Guadalajara. It's like this big city. There's lots happening. You take an Uber like 25 minutes kind of northwest, and all of a sudden you're out of the city and you're in this greenery. You get out of the car and you start hiking down this mountain, essentially into this canyon. And it's just a whole nother world. You can't hear the city. You don't even like see airplanes really flying overhead. And it's like you've been dropped in the middle of Jurassic Park, yet you're like 25 minutes from downtown Guadalajara.
And it's I think maybe this is different for other people, but for us, I think our experience is hiking, right? It's like you go somewhere to hike, you can see what you're going to hike because it's going up, and then you hike up, and then you get like a great view, and then you hike back down. And this is like the complete reverse. You go somewhere, you can't see what you're going to hike until you're like right above it. You're like, oh, we're going down there. Then you hike down, and then you're like completely detached from everything else. You don't have a view of it, but it's still a beautiful view of the area. And then you have to hike back up afterwards.
Yeah, it's funny. Like our Arizona listeners are like, canyons? What?
You haven't heard of canyons before?
But for our, Rocky Mountain folks, you know what we're talking about. I think it's just a strange experience doing the other way around. And it's funny because every time we've ever like summited a mountain or done a challenging uphill hike, I'm always like, oh, I'm so glad that part's over. But going down can be challenging too. And this was kind of a weird mind trip because you're going down and it's quite steep. And the whole time, the only thing I'm thinking about is like, should we just turn around now? Because we have to go back up this thing and we're going to be tired by the end of this. But once you just start getting down and seeing the views, it's like you can't turn around. It's so beautiful and it's 100% worth like all the calf pain after.
Yeah, I think if you're fit and active and you're in Guadalajara, this is definitely a must do. And it's something that, yeah, again, pretty close to the city. You can take an Uber there and really quiet. We went on a weekday, I think.
Yeah, we did.
And extremely quiet, almost like in a concerning fashion because you got to the end and we're like, are we like completely alone here? But yeah, a really, really, really cool thing to do.
Yeah, if you like nature, getting outside, going to Barranca de Huentitán is definitely something that we recommend. And if you're like, what on earth is that word? We'll put it in the show notes, but you can also just Google like canyon hike Guadalajara and it'll come up for you.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about kind of the experiences in and around Guadalajara. What were kind of some of the things we did in and around there? Yeah,
so one of my very, very, very favorite experiences that we had while we were in Guadalajara is that we took the Tequila train to Tequila, and we took the Herradura Express. And Herradura I'm not pronouncing that very well.
I'm not even gonna take a try. Herradura.
Herradura. And Herradura is one of the main tequila producers in that area.
I mean, even in the U.S., if you drink tequila, you've seen Herradura bottles around. It's got the horseshoe on it. Or you might have seen, if you're like us and have had experiences drinking cheap tequila, El Jimador, which is another really popular brand which Herradura makes in the same location.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we decided to go to Guadalajara, this was like, I think we booked like flights, Airbnb, tequila train. It was like one of those things that we knew we wanted to do. We had been not dreaming about this adventure, but we've been like eager to do it for a while. It feels like just something I mean, tequila and mezcal is such a big part of Mexican culture. It's something that we both really love about Mexican culture. And so we wanted to learn more about it. And we had heard that the Herradura Express was a great way to do it. So we bought tickets on a VIP train. And so basically what happens is you show up, I think it was a Saturday for us, and we showed up on Saturday morning, pretty early in the morning at the Guadalajara train station. And then we boarded into our carts, and then you start going on a train for about an hour-ish to get to the region of Tequila. And the whole way while you're on the train, they serve you different types of tequila and different tequila cocktails and that sort of thing. And depending on which cart you're in, it'll be different. For us, with our VIP cart, everything was pretty much unlimited. So if you wanted to try something different, you could just ask for it. If you wanted another cocktail, you could ask for it. If you didn't like something, you didn't have to drink it. And it was so fun. And then once we got there, we got a tour of the factory. We got to learn about the production of tequila. We got to see how it was made. We got to have lunch and a show. We got to drink more tequila. And then we got on the train a couple hours later, and we had the same thing going back home. There was snacks. There was more cocktails. It was awesome. It was like probably my favorite day while we were in Guadalajara.
Yeah, it goes right up to the top of the list for me in terms of coolest things and funnest things we've done in Mexico. I mean, just traveling in general. It was a little bit expensive, but if you're traveling from Canada, the US, definitely, in your budget and super duper worth it. Such a cool experience. And you mentioned again, being the show, there was a mariachi show at lunch there. And it reminds me of how Jalisco, I think, is such a important part of like what we think of as Mexican culture and just a lot of the culture that is all over Mexico. Tequila is just about an hour drive outside of Guadalajara. Mariachi music comes from there and kind of has its roots in Jalisco, and lots of the foods do as well.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I actually didn't really know before doing this tour is that anytime you're drinking quote unquote tequila from around the world, it actually comes from the region of Tequila, or I think there's 5 other approved states in Mexico that can grow that particular type of agave plant that makes quote unquote tequila. So a lot of times we think about like, this alcohol called tequila, it's like rum or vodka, but it's actually a little bit different in that you could make, we actually saw it in other places in Mexico, but it's like syrup of, or like juice of the agave, like jarabe de agave or alcohol de agave. And that is like quote unquote tequila, but they can't call it tequila because it's not from the right state or grown from the right plant. So anytime you're drinking tequila, it is coming from Jalisco or an approved state that grows that type of plant.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to learn. And also just being on the train, the landscape traveling out of Guadalajara through Jalisco towards Tequila is beautiful. Rolling hills, mountains, agave fields, green agricultural areas. It's so amazing and so beautiful. And yeah, we learned kind of about the overview of the process of growing the agave, how long it takes. A lot of the plants that are used in agave are 7 years old before they're harvested. And for tequila, they actually harvest the agave. They create kind of the pit of it, which they call a piña, and then they steam them all in kind of like a big sauna type environment. And that's one of the differences with mezcal, is that mezcal is that process is cooking is actually done by burning in the ground, and that's why mezcal has a smokier flavor. Crush out all the syrup, and then go from there with fermenting the syrup to make the tequila. And you do a tequila tasting, learn so much about it. I think definitely a must-do experience in Guadalajara. There's 2 trains, so Jose Cuervo, of course, the most famous tequila brand, has one, and Herradura has one. We found Herradura's goes back and forth. Jose Cuervo only goes one direction. Just seemed like a bit better value. And to us, although we didn't take the Jose Cuervo tour, it seemed like the Herradura one was a bit more focused on like the process and a little bit less focused on kind of a show and that type of thing. But we didn't take it, of course, so we can't speak to it. We've met people who have done that one and really liked it, but we thought there's a bit better value with Herradura. But just be aware that there are 2 different ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we take a little break?
We should. We will be right back. Traveling takes a toll on your body, whether it is going from hot to cold climates or being in buses, planes and automobiles where you might catch someone else's germs. You never know when you're about to get a cold.
Trust Zicam to knock out a cold at the first sign of it. Other cold medicines only mask symptoms, but Zicam is homeopathic and clinically proven to shorten colds when taken at the first sign. Find Zicam cold remedy products from rapid melts to elderberry medicated fruit drops at all major retailers, including Walmart. Zicam cold remedy products are safe and effective. Visit Zicam.com/wanderers to receive a $2 coupon on your next Zicam purchase. Once again, visit Zicam.com/wanderers to receive a $2 coupon on your next purchase. All right, we are back talking about our time in Guadalajara, and we just covered our experience going to Tequila, and the next experience that we wanted to talk about that was pretty special for us to experience was Mexican Independence Day. And so Mexican Independence Day happens the middle of September. September 16th is the day. It's a little bit complicated because some things you'll read will say September 15th, and that's because the grito, or grito translates to shout. And so this grito or shout or call to action happens at midnight on, I guess, between the 15th and 16th. So that's why you'll see some stuff that says the 15th, some stuff says the 16th, and really things happen kind of at night on the 15th, and then the 16th there'll be like parades and mariachi and all sorts of stuff happening depending on what Mexican city you're in. And although we've spent a lot of time in Mexico, this was the first time that we actually were in Mexico for an Independence Day.
Yeah, it was funny because in the lead up to it, we were having a really hard time trying to figure out when the grito happened. Something said at midnight. I think we found some things that said 11. We were just like, okay, we'll go into the center. And I think we got there at like 9:30 thinking like, yeah, we'll go find a spot. And then it ended up being like way earlier than 11. I think it happened at 10, right?
Yeah, it was something like that. And this is just very Latin American in general, but also just very Mexican. It's like, if you know, you know, and if you don't know, you're like trying to find the information. And so because we kind of know that Mexico's like that, and we'd read all these different kind of, I guess, like different blogs and articles, watched a couple of videos where people were like, oh yeah, we were waiting for it to happen. Then we realized we missed it because it happened earlier. We're like, okay, let's get to the city center early. Let's get a spot. And I'm glad we did in general because it was packed there. But it was a really, really neat experience. We got to hear the governor of Jalisco do the grito, or, you know, whatever city or state you're in, it'll be different. Like maybe it'll be the president if you're in Mexico City, maybe it'll be a different governor or that sort of thing. But we got to hear the governor of Jalisco do it, and they do the same call that was done back in 1810 on September 15th. That was the call for Mexican independence from the Spanish. And it was a really, really interesting experience to hear that. And so they do kind of a call and response between the person delivering the grito and then the people who are watching, and then they ring a bell. And then after that, there's a ton of fireworks, all of which were a little bit too close for comfort to where we were in the central square in the historic center. But it was a really, really interesting experience. And we actually took a little bit of audio clips from that experience. So we will share a little bit of that with you here. And so kind of
continuing on from there, Independence Day was a great experience. And we also took a trip to Ajijic, which is really close to Guadalajara. We've talked about on a previous episode, we talked about with Jake and Michelle in a recent episode because they actually based themselves there.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that really excited us about being in Guadalajara is that our friends Jake and Michelle, who you guys know from the podcast, and their toddlers, Henley and Jagger, who as a family are retired toddlers across all the social platforms, they have been based there the last couple of years. And so we got to see them, I guess 2 years ago when they were on their first year there. The kids were taking some school there. And since then, they've continued to go back and spend about close to half their year there so that the kids can, be in school, learn some Spanish, integrate with the local culture. And Ajijic is only like 45 minutes to an hour outside of Guadalajara. It's even closer to the airport because the Guadalajara airport's located a little bit outside of Guadalajara. And it is an amazing, amazing place for a weekend trip. So we were super grateful to be able to go back and eat good food and have good conversation and just have a really enjoyable time there.
Yeah, and it ended up not working out because of some rental car shenanigans. But there was something that I want to mention. Guachimontones is apparently a really cool area just outside of Guadalajara with some old pyramid ruins that you can check out and should be kind of on a list to explore if you're going to Guadalajara. We actually didn't get the chance to go because we were planning on connecting those together and the rental car fell through.
Thanks, Alamo, for ruining our weekend. Just kidding. It was fun. We had a great time in Ajijic.
Absolutely. And then one of the other cool things about Guadalajara is that it's a big city. I think one of my takeaways might be, as a spoiler, that you feel like you're in a smaller city, but you're in a really big city. And so that means there's lots of big shows and events. There's 2 professional soccer teams, Chivas being the most popular, with a massive, cool soccer stadium if you are into watching soccer. And lots of concerts come through. So we actually got to go to a concert, which I think would be, if you asked people like, oh, what concert did you go to in Mexico? This would probably be like on the bottom of the list of your expectations.
Yeah. So we saw Mumford & Sons in Mexico.
Which is,
super random. I mean, when we were in Mexico City, we saw people like Carlos Vives, J Balvin, Bad Bunny, Maluma, what you'd expect to see in Mexico. And in Guadalajara, we saw Mumford & Sons. And I think one of the best parts about it is that people in Guadalajara love Mumford & Sons. It was so awesome. And so we really like going to shows and concerts and stuff if there's, a band or an artist that we really like coming through. And Guadalajara is a big city, like Ryan mentioned, where there are tons of events. So if you do like that kind of stuff, just keep your eyes peeled for all of that. And if you're not into Spanish music, you might be able to catch a great artist like Mumford & Sons, like we did.
Mm-hmm. And something else that is really important about making Guadalajara a great place to visit and a great place if you're a nomad is the food scene. There's a ton of great restaurants there. There's a lot of young people, young professionals going out, eating all types of things and amazing food. You're never at a shortage for what to eat in Guadalajara.
Yeah, absolutely. We ate a ton while we were in Guadalajara. So why don't we go through a couple of our top restaurant recommendations?
Yeah, and we will put this on theworldwanderers.com in the show notes for this episode. So if you're planning a trip, you can go see all of the many restaurants that we liked in Guadalajara. But let's start with breakfast. Where would you go if you were looking for breakfast in Guadalajara?
All right, so there are lots of different places that you could eat breakfast at in Guadalajara, and it kind of depends if you want more traditional breakfast or if you want Mexican breakfast. So I'll do the traditional breakfast in hopes that you mention a Mexican breakfast option. And I'm going to say a restaurant called La Cafeteria, which was located really close to our Airbnb in the Americana district. It's in a really cute kind of old house, and they have all sorts of options, everything from pancakes to omelets to chilaquiles if you do want to have a more Mexican option, great juices, great coffees, all of that good stuff. What would you say?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a Mexican option, La Chata, which is actually open throughout the day. You can get breakfast, lunch, or dinner there. But going for breakfast is really cool. They've got lots of specials for things that you might imagine are more breakfasty and for things you think probably aren't that breakfasty. But amazing food, great portions, great quality, really quick and snappy. We had some amazing chilaquiles there.
Amazing.
which now I can feel my stomach rumbling as I think about it.
Yeah.
Some great tacos there. And I think enchiladas as well.
Yep.
All smothered in delicious salsas, cheese, meats. Guacamole was amazing.
Yeah, it's good for all meals. But if you like chilaquiles or you want to try chilaquiles and have a really good chilaquile experience, because the experience is really important to make sure that you do like it, I would say La Chata is a great option for some chilaquiles in Guadalajara.
Okay, so what about lunch?
All right, so my favorite lunch place that we discovered is a taco place called Taco Fish La Paz. There's a couple different locations in Guadalajara. Fortunately, one of them is just a couple blocks off of Chapultepec, which meant we could walk to it from our co-working space. And it's amazing. You go in and you order, and they have all different types of fish, from breaded fish to grilled fish to shrimp to mixed types of fish. They have cheesy options. They have not cheesy options. And honestly, it is so good. You can get a couple tacos for a really reasonable price, a big glass of hibiscus juice or jamaica, and then you can douse it with all the sauces and toppings that you want. And my mouth's watering. It is so good.
Yeah, we should have thought about how we should have eaten before recording this episode, because I 100% second that. Amazing restaurant. If you go to Guadalajara, you've got to go to Taco Fish La Paz. Affordable, and you can just eat your face off. It's the type of place where, like, no matter how much you order, you're going to find yourself wanting to go back and order another one. I can't remember the name of the taco, but they have a taco that is fried cheese with shrimp in it, and it is to die for.
It's just the shrimp quesadilla.
Okay. Okay. Another good lunch option that I am going to go with is a seafood place. Guadalajara, you may not expect or think of as like a seafood destination, but it's only a couple hours away from the Pacific Ocean, from Puerto Vallarta. And we went to a place called Los Colomos a couple times in Guadalajara, in that Chapultepec area. Really good, really low-key, affordable place. You can get amazing different types of ceviches. Definitely recommend that. And I'm going to throw another one out there, which is not what you'd expect in Guadalajara, maybe, but Hato Ramen. So it's a really cool Japanese ramen restaurant, and they actually have gluten-free ramen options, which is important because Amanda can't eat gluten.
It was actually the first time I ever ate ramen, like, in my adult life. And I didn't really like stuff like that as a kid. We didn't eat a ton of food like that in growing up in my childhood. So it was like my first time having ramen at a restaurant, which I know is crazy because I turn 31 tomorrow, and that's a lot of years to live without ramen. But when you're gluten-free, ramen's tough. And Hato is great. You can get a big bowl of ramen for a pretty good price.
Yeah, and so what about dinner?
Oh, there's so many places to eat for dinner. So if I was going for a nicer meal with friends, maybe for a special occasion, looking for some really good food that maybe costs a little bit more, I would recommend a restaurant called Bruna. And we actually found out about this restaurant from our friend Nathan, who is Foodie Flashpacker across all platforms. He has a great blog post, which we'll link on the show notes, to some really good restaurant recommendations. And Bruna was on there. I was immediately enticed by the menu, and we went with some friends, and it's a cool atmosphere. They have great cocktails, and they have really good food. It's definitely not like super budget friendly, but at the same time, you can get really good food for like a pretty reasonable price. Yeah,
it's one of those where, like you mentioned, not super budget friendly, but if you were eating something similar in Vancouver, Canada, Toronto, it would be off the charts expensive. So a really great restaurant. And I'm going to go back to the Asian flavors. I think our favorite sushi restaurant in Mexico, and we're the type of people who eat sushi in Mexico and Mexican in Japan and other Asian places. So we've actually tried a fair few, is Suhiro. Again, kind of near the Americanas area of Guadalajara. Really cool building. From the outside, it looks just a bit strange, but when you get inside, the environment's cool. They've got kind of a zen pond with koi, and really interesting environment. You can do hibachi there, but we eat the sushi, and it's really, really good.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely would second that favorite sushi in Mexico for sure. So if you've been in Mexico for a while, you're craving good sushi, Suhiro is your place in Guadalajara. A couple of other shout outs to some really great restaurants that we tried. Cabana, which you guys may have heard about, is one of our favorite restaurants in Mexico City. And we were very, very pleased to discover that it also is in Guadalajara and it's equally as delicious there. As well as La Docena, which is a seafood restaurant that is also in Mexico City and is super delicious. So that is also in Guadalajara and is equally as good. And then there's also a place that we discovered called Labne Cocina Lebanesa, which is a Lebanese food restaurant, which is great for lunch or dinner and is super delicious. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. If you were recommending a cafe, a place for, coffee or tea, where would you suggest that people visit?
Yeah, so I guess I'm kind of on a theme here with some Asian influence in Guadalajara. But one thing that we were super duper excited to find existed in Guadalajara was Gongcha. It's probably our favorite bubble tea chain. You can get amazing passion fruit with coconut jelly, which we fed ourselves on for months and months while we were living in Asia. And we were really excited to see that it was in Guadalajara. And it's, I believe, only 1 or 2 locations, so you might have to be a little bit plan out your day to go check one out. But if you like bubble tea and you like Gongcha, you'd be super excited to find it's there. And there was another bubble tea place right by where we lived, actually, in Guadalajara, called Namcha, which was really cool. How about you?
Yeah, there was a couple places that I really liked for more, I guess, traditional coffees, you might say. So one called Vanilla Coffee and Tea, which is a really cute little cafe located in the Americana district. And then we also went to another little place that was super cute called Cafe M. And that place is up by the park that I mentioned. And it's also in the same area as, it's near to Gongcha, Cabana, La Docena, the Lebanese place that I mentioned. So there's a lot of places kind of around Cafe M, but it was also really good.
Yeah, and so let's quickly burn through a couple other recommendations. If you're looking for tacos, there's lots of good places. Guadalajara is a taco lover's dream. And one we really liked on Chapultepec is called Tomate Taqueria. You can get the tacos al pastor there, or you get the pastor combo, and it's amazing to die for. Really, really affordable.
Yeah, you can eat like a ton of food or get like a couple meals worth and take some to go for like a really good price.
And then for drinks, so we went to a really cool mezcal bar called Bar Mezcal Agüita, which I definitely recommend if you're out and about looking for drinks. Again, if you're looking for somewhere to have a good drink, that whole Chapultepec area is full of interesting bars and pubs.
Yeah, and somewhere that you should definitely check out for both food, well, basic kind of pub fare and drinks is Cerveceria Chapultepec. We weren't sure what the deal with this place was when we first got there because we're walking on Chapultepec, we're seeing all these cool different restaurants, and then every block we're seeing Cerveceria. And every single one was super, super packed with people. And we're like, what is the deal with this place? Like, how do they all stay in business? Well, everything on their menu is 19 pesos each, which, for those of you listening, is about $1.
Yeah. So
everything.
Beers, mixed drinks, mini burgers, orders of fries.
Yeah, tuna taco, everything, 19 pesos. And so this is a really great place, especially if you're budget conscious and you just want a couple beers with friends. You can go have a couple beers for a couple of bucks, maybe have a snack or two, and you'll find these all over Guadalajara, but specifically a ton of them along Chapultepec Avenue, which is where we would recommend to go out for drinks anyways.
And we just want to take a very quick break to tell you about a new project that we're working on.
Yeah, so we launched a couple of weeks ago a brand new podcast called The World Wanders Insider. And this podcast is available exclusively to our supporters on Patreon. So for a very, very small fee, like talking the cost of a latte with almond milk per month, you can get a ton of exclusive content. And what we're doing with this is we're creating different series of the show that are more specific to different topics. And so the first series that we've kicked off this Insider podcast with is how to become a digital nomad. And so a couple weeks ago, we launched our first episode on our regular feed, as well as to the Insider audience. And that was all about our journey as digital nomads. It's more specific information that you guys haven't heard about so far. And we have lots of episodes coming where we're going to dive even deeper into that information to really give you a clear understanding as to how to become a digital nomad.
Yeah, there's so many different ways out there. It doesn't need to be along one path. So many people are doing interesting things to blend that love of travel with creating a great career, whether that's teaching English, creating a podcast, making YouTube videos, editing papers, whatever it may be. We want to talk to them. We want to share their stories. So make sure to go to patreon.com/theworldwanderers and get access to the World Wanderers Insider podcast.
Yeah. And in case you're like, well, I already listened to that episode, I don't really want to pay for it. Well, we've actually got a bunch of other episodes already up there. So we've got episodes with 3 other guests. So with Becky Gillespie from Tokyo Becky, as well as from Sasha and Rachel separately talking about their own businesses separate of Grateful Gypsies. And then we have a brand new episode coming next month as well. So every month there's going to be one new piece of content coming, and there's already 4 episodes for you to listen to. So there's lots there. So like Ryan said, it's patreon.com/theworldwanderers. And of course, if you have any questions about it, definitely just reach out to us, info@theworldwanderers.com.
So I want to get in and just talk a little bit about pros and cons of Guadalajara. And to do it, I want to ask you a question, Amanda. And so if you think about Mexico, there's so many great nomad hubs. There's, of course, Mexico City. There's Puerto Vallarta. There's Playa del Carmen. There's Cancun, if that's your thing. There's Mérida. There's Oaxaca. And there's Guadalajara. Why should people consider and have Guadalajara as their choice if they're thinking about finding a nomad base in Mexico?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question because Mexico does have a lot of great hubs, like you said. And I think that every nomad hub or every city has something different to offer. And one of the things that I really liked about Guadalajara is that it has that big city vibe. So if you're looking for a big city, something that's not, I guess, like Playa del Carmen, Puerto Vallarta, Oaxaca, you want something a little bit more with more action, more events, more opportunities for co-working spaces, networking events, more restaurants, that type of thing. I think that Guadalajara is a great option because it's a little smaller than Mexico City. So one of the things that we hear often, because we love Mexico City so much, is that people are like, it's way too big. It's so overwhelming. Guadalajara is not too big and it's not so overwhelming. You can cross from one side of the city to the other in a reasonable amount of time. Whereas, Mexico City, as you're landing in a flight, they're basically just getting you to like straighten your seats and put your table trays up, and you're like already over the city and you're still like 25 minutes away from landing. And Guadalajara is just a way, way smaller city. So I'm not saying that because I would pick necessarily Guadalajara over Mexico City personally, but I do think that if you like the city vibe and you're not necessarily looking for like a beach type town, but you're feeling like Mexico City is too big for you, I think Guadalajara is a great option for that.
Yeah, I think that for me, I would break it down like this. Like if you're someone who is maybe, I think it kind of depends on what you're looking to get out of it. If you're someone who's like, got a certain amount of, and just looking at this from a nomad perspective, you're looking for more travel stuff. Like if you've got, you're going to be somewhere for 8 weeks and your workload is like managed, you've got that under control. You're not really looking to like focus in on too much work stuff, but just kind of manage your work stuff and get out and do lots of stuff. You don't have to have a workload. I think Mexico City is probably maybe a better option. There's so much stuff to do. But Guadalajara, if you're looking to get into a rhythm, focus on work stuff, and have a really good balance, I think is a great option for that because there's a little bit less distractions. There's so many good lifestyle aspects of the city, like you mentioned. Just feels a lot smaller. So many great restaurants, great places to eat, but there's not, that huge list of things to do and see. But there's still so much travel you can do in and around Guadalajara. You mentioned kind of some of the chaos that comes from flying into Mexico City. Guadalajara has an airport that connects to all sorts of places around the world. A little bit out of town, pretty smooth to get to. Traffic's not so terrible as it is in Mexico City. And the airport's a lot more chill and calm. And you can go all over the place. Good bus depot as well. Ubering around. So many good things about just setting up a life there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that you touched on that I just want to highlight is that it is close to a lot of different stuff. I mean, we talked about going to Ajijic and Tlaquepaque, as well as to Tequila, which are super close. But we also took a weekend trip to Guanajuato, and there is an episode out about that you can go listen to. And that was only a couple hours by bus. We have friends in Puerto Vallarta, and Puerto Vallarta is only a couple hours by bus from Guadalajara too. So if you like the city life, but then you're also interested in the beach, I feel like that's a great option because you are closer by bus or by car than you are somewhere like Mexico City or even Oaxaca. Oaxaca looks really close. Like Oaxaca City looks really close to the coast, but you have to cross like a mountain range there and the roads are not great. So it's really nice that you have, countryside, lake getaway with Ajijic and Chapala, as well as the ocean really close by. So I feel like Guadalajara really has a lot to offer, not only in the city, but just in the surrounding area too.
Yeah, just super livable. And so, if people who aren't nomads and aren't looking to base themselves somewhere forever, Guadalajara is not really, high on that list of probably your expected locations if you're planning a short trip through Mexico. Why should people consider visiting Guadalajara?
Tequila train.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just, I think I mentioned it briefly, just so much culture in Jalisco, and tequila is representative of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, more so than the tequila train. And if you don't drink tequila or you don't drink in general, there's still lots of reasons why you should go. I think that the history that we talked about is really important for Mexico. It's so rich. Going to eat at a traditional restaurant, see mariachi, hear them play some of the local music and do some of the local dances can be just give you a really good insight into the culture. And I think, having come from a background where my family did more 2-week vacations and we did things like all-inclusives in Mexico for many years along the Mayan Riviera and Cancun and those areas, if you've ever seen one of those shows that they perform around dinner time, a lot of that stuff comes from the state of Jalisco. A lot of the clothing that they're wearing is from that area. And so Jalisco is a very important state for the country of Mexico. And so if you want to learn more about the country, I think that, going there is a great option. And then I think the same thing applies to people who are just traveling, like being able to go to Guadalajara and maybe get an Airbnb or a hotel for a week and then do all the little trips we talked about, like the Tlaquepaque, the Tequila train, going into Ajijic for a day or maybe even staying overnight is great. You can access easily Puerto Vallarta. You could bus easily over to Mexico. You can bus easily to Guanajuato, San Miguel de Allende. I mean, your opportunities are endless. So I would say if the food and the tequila and the culture doesn't sell you, know that it's a great hub for getting other places.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about it in our Mexico City episode about how I think a lot of people overlook Mexico as like a short-term travel destination. Like if you're in Texas, if you're in California, getting to Mexico is easier than getting to a lot of places in the US. And so Guadalajara has a great international airport where you could look at doing a long weekend there and get down there in a couple hours. You go to your airport, you're in the city, you can go visit Tequila on the Saturday, you can catch a mariachi show at night, you could go do so much cool, interesting stuff, or just eat amazing food and drink tequila and do it over the course of a weekend and be back home and have had a really affordable, really valuable travel experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully we've officially sold you on Guadalajara. If you're not drooling over tacos and tequila cocktails, then I guess we haven't done a very good job. But hopefully you're excited about going to Guadalajara and visiting soon.
Yeah, and so we will make sure that on theworldwanderers.com there are notes and as many links as we can find to the places we loved in Guadalajara so you can check them out. And if you're planning a trip there and have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And so you can connect with us on social media or through our group and post a question and get recommendations from lots of other people. On Facebook, just search The World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
Thanks so much for listening.
Until next time. To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at World Wanderers 1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.